Questions regarding the existence of evil are as big as they come when we think about the existence of God. That famous sort of Stephen Fry clip that he did last year, sometime at the beginning of last year, it just went viral around the internet, didn't it? It was so widely shared. I think this is exactly why I don't believe in God. Everyone was sharing it, because it really struck a chord with lots and lots of people. Speaking for myself, this is probably, and this and questions related to it, would be my biggest reasons to doubt the Christian faith. I'd say less so is that an intellectual thing. I think actually, I'll be arguing for it, the Christian faith intellectually presents the best way to explain the way our world is. But more emotionally, when you see torture on the news, or you hear of child neglect, or you know a loved one who dies or suffers greatly, or both, you just think, how can there be a good God at the centre of this universe? So I assume many of you will have that question, and that's why the CU have taken this sort of 3 weeks to do these. So last week they did this, does God disprove evil? Next week they're going to do, can evil be put right? And we here in the middle, the question is evil God's fault? Which, by the way, when you look into it, is the hardest question of the three. So go easy on me. My goodness, what a tough question this was as I started thinking through how to tackle it. So the question we're looking at is evil God's fault? For evil to be God's fault, evil needs to be real, and God needs to be the one to blame for it being here. I'm going to tackle sort of each of those individually. So firstly, does evil actually exist? I think in one sense we would say it very clearly does exist. We just feel deeply that things in this world are not as they should be, and certain things that people do just should not be done. There was kind of disagreement of this in the past, kind of postmodernism and stuff like that, but I think that's been widely discredited now, and you see it really clearly in our use of social media. If anyone doubts the existence of evil, just have a look at the posts that people post on their Facebook about the US election. This sort of thing, social media, where people get to say what they think about the world, has been used so often to say this is wrong and this is right. It's like we deep down know that evil does exist. But in another way, we only know what is evil by comparing it to what is good. So barrel bombing civilians is evil, I think we would all agree, because it contravenes certain ways we think that you should treat people and deal with disagreements. So a lot of philosophers have started to talk about, or for hundreds of years have spoken about, evil as like a kind of degradation or lack of something good. It's kind of like, if you think of light and darkness, darkness is almost not there. It's just what is there when light isn't there. It's a lack of light. I think the guy last week spoke about cold and heat, and cold is kind of seen as the absence of heat. So by this reasoning, evil is kind of things that are not as they should be. That would be a way to put evil, rather than, it's not a thing in itself, it's things not being as they should be. So that means if evil is like that, if it doesn't exist in a kind of ontological sense, but does exist in a very sort of real sense, like darkness very much so does exist, any explanation we have of the world has to account for that. It's interesting, in our church we recently talked to the congregation about doing some fairly big building works. It would mean selling off one part, sort of one building, and using the money to do massive renovations to the others. And initially there was kind of a lot of opposition. People were kind of saying, but this drawback, this drawback, this drawback. And you go, well, yeah, those are drawbacks. So what we did was we put on the table to the congregation all the things we could possibly do. We came up with 7 options we could possibly do with our building. We said we need to choose one. And we encourage people, rather than just criticising options, to actually choose one and defend their option, as well as kind of saying, this is why I prefer it to another option. And we very much so need to do that with our view of the world and how it explains evil. So a pastor called Tim Keller, and he was asked what his main doubt was about whether Christianity was true. And he said, well, the existence of evil. So then the questioner said, what makes you think that that doubt, doesn't disprove at all? And he says, because the Christian explanation is better than all the others that they are. That was his opinion. So just before we look into the Christian one, just take one alternative, the atheism, because I think that's one where a lot of my friends who would be atheists would maybe not think through the implications to their belief system as when they look at Christianity. Richard Dawkins put it in quite a helpful way, thinking about atheism and evil, where he says, in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. If you believe that, I'd encourage you to think through what it means to actually live like that's true, like evil doesn't exist. Look at your social media and the things you say about the news. Does that chime with the atheist picture of the world? So that's a little bit about the existence of evil and the fact that every worldview needs to think this through. You may have all kinds of different worldviews here, and I'll be interested to hear how you think your view of the world fits this question. So now looking at the sort of Christian worldview, is this evil that we've agreed in a sense exists, even though it's not like an ontological thing? Who is to blame for it? Is God to blame for it? Who is to blame for it? The Bible's answer, obviously I'm a Christian, I get the stuff I get from the Bible, I believe God's spoken through that. And the Bible's answer is basically, the reason evil exists in our world is that we chose evil. We made an accountable decision as a race to turn from God, who is the fountain of all goodness, and therefore to embrace evil. Now that was a moral thing. We have morally rejected God. We didn't choose, it would be really good to have some earthquakes and tsunamis. We didn't choose that pain. But when you reject the fountain of good, you don't just reject his moral goodness, you reject his sort of provision and providence of a world that's all good. And therefore we experience natural evil as well as, or physical evil it's also called, as well as moral evil in our world. And of God, the Bible says things like, this is from a book called Habakkuk in the Bible, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. Far from making evil, God won't even look on it. He wants evil 1 billion miles away from him. He hates it. He would not make it. So the Bible says evil exists in our world because we chose to reject God, and that isn't his fault. But I guess that still leaves quite a big question, doesn't it? Because he made us. And he knows everything, and everything happens because he wills it, he permits it to happen. So if he created us knowing this was all going to happen and it's within his will, surely that makes it his fault. Certainly, if he doesn't have a good reason for letting it happen, it's going to be his fault. So my daughter Gracie, we've taken her several times to get her injections to stop her catching various diseases that they've got these things for to stop you getting it. So we take her, and the first time we went, she got 3 injections, and she absolutely hated it. The first injection, she was like, oh, that's so sore, what happened, that's awful. The second injection comes in, she's like, oh, it's awful, it happened again, don't let that ever happen again, and she's crying. And then the third one goes in, and she's like, what's going on here? She was absolutely furious. But I don't think I was at fault for taking her, while I let it happen, I'm not at fault for it, because there was a greater good. There was a reason to let it happen. And I guess the question would then be, does God have a greater reason, a greater good for allowing evil to come into existence? I think the answer the Bible would give is yes, he does. But the truth is, we don't really know it in much detail. We get kind of hints of it in the Bible, like it's impossible for there to be kind of real choices if you can't choose a bad one, and it's impossible to see certain aspects of goodness and the goodness of God and even the goodness of humanity. Things like bravery or forgiveness are not possible. You can't see them unless evil exists. But those, we can maybe chat about them more later, they still leave massive questions as to why God would have a good reason to allow evil to exist in our world. We can maybe chat about it more in Q&A. And I guess what I'd say is, even though we have that sort of question, I've sort of said there's this sort of hanging there confusion, I don't fully get it. I think that we can trust that what God says about evil is trustworthy and something we can build our lives upon. And I think it fits better than any of the other alternatives. I think this for two reasons. I think we should trust him in this for two reasons. One is, we should expect not to be able to understand this. My daughter Gracie doesn't understand all that's going on in going to the doctors to get jags. She doesn't know about antibodies. She doesn't know about diseases. And surely if there's a difference between me as a human of 35 years and her as a human of, 3 months or whatever it was when we went to get them, if there's a difference in understanding of that, the difference between us and God has surely got to be so, so much bigger. And therefore, just intellectually speaking, we shouldn't expect that we will be able to work out and fully understand the mind of God. But secondly, I think God has shown us what the answer is not. The answer is not that God doesn't care. And he's shown us this by using the greatest evil ever committed to accomplish the greatest good ever accomplished. You see, my daughter Gracie, she doesn't reject me after we go to the doctor. She cuddles me for comfort, even though I'm the one who took her into the place to get this pain. Why does she do that? Well, because she knows I love her. She knows that I care for her, and she knows that I'm trustworthy. And therefore, because of all my past actions, she says, even though I don't understand this, I'm going to come to you for comfort in this difficult situation rather than rejecting you. I think we can see that with God so clearly. He is not some unaffectionate, distant being. He is a passionate lover of this world. He stepped down into this world and became one of us. That's what the Bible says. He demonstrates that he can be trusted through what he does. God, through the person of his Son Jesus, experienced evil. He experienced the brokenness and pain of a human life, but more, he experienced so much more when he died in his death. The Bible says that's the greatest evil that was ever committed. Humanity conspiring to kill their God. The one who deserved the most good got something incredibly bad as he was killed on the cross. And the Bible is really clear that God planned that evil. He allowed it to happen because he had a good purpose in it. That purpose being that as Jesus died on that cross, he took the punishment for all of the evil that we have done so that we can be forgiven and one day be in a place where evil is gone. Evil people can't be there, but people whose evil has been dealt with can be in a place without evil with God. And that shows us we can trust God, that while he's not the cause of evil and he's not to blame for evil, he Israel, and he does care, and he is the one to fix it. I have run out of time, literally 1 second left. I had to cut loads to get this talk under 15 minutes, so I realised there'll be lots of things where you're like, you didn't explain that in as much depth, so I'm really looking forward to engaging with you guys in Q&A. Thank you.